I'm Patricia Green, 64 years old, and the night my son Daniel got married, I stood on the marble steps of a venue I'd paid for while his bride looked me dead in the eye and said, "You weren't invited." He didn't say a word, just stood there a few feet behind her. The guests around us turned to watch like they were waiting for something dramatic to happen. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just smiled, turned around, and walked myself right back down those steps. By the time I reached the parking lot, I already knew whatever came next. I'd handle it differently. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to choose between your peace and your pride, go ahead and tap that like and subscribe button. I was born in a small town just outside Tulsa, raised on chipped mugs, good manners, and the kind of kindness that didn't need to be asked for. My parents taught me that respect was earned, but love was given freely. We didn't have much, but I never felt like we lacked anything that truly mattered. I carried those values into adulthood, into motherhood, into every birthday cake I baked, and every check I signed. Daniel was my only child, a quiet, thoughtful boy with thick glasses and a big heart. He used to draw little pictures on the backs of my grocery lists and tape. "I love you," notes to the fridge when he thought I was having a bad day when his father passed. It was just the two of us. I worked overtime at the clinic and pinched every penny so he wouldn't have to give up his college dreams when he met Ashley. I was happy for him. He looked at her like she hung the moon. Ashley came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't make jokes about clearance sales. Her family threw parties with live string quartets and spoke in soft tones that made you feel like you were being measured. She was polite always, but in the way you'd say, "Thank you" to a server who refilled your water, automatic distant still. I smiled and made casseroles and kept showing up because that's what you do when your son falls in love. When they got engaged, Daniel came to me and asked for help with the wedding. He didn't ask much, just said, "Ashley had a vision." I offered to cover the venue deposit and then the florist and then the catering. No one twisted my arm, I offered. I wanted him to feel proud of his day. The more checks I wrote, the quieter I became in their plans. Suddenly, I wasn't copied on emails or asked about head counts at the bridal shower. My name was left off the thank you board. I told myself they were just busy, distracted, focused on starting their life together. I didn't want to make things uncomfortable the night before the wedding. I ironed my dress. It was navy blue, long-sleeved, nothing too flashy. Something simple but neat. I had my hair done and arrived on time. I stood at the front entrance, clutch in hand, ready to be seated. That's when Ashley stepped forward, lips curved just slightly. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for the people behind her to hear. "You weren't invited." Daniel stood behind her, his eyes locked somewhere over my shoulder. He didn't speak. Not even when the whispers started. Not even when I turned and walked back down the stairs. Not even when I passed the valet and slid into my car with a grace I didn't know. I still had. The drive home was quiet. No music, no tears. Just the sound of my turn signal ticking steadily down each side street until I pulled into my driveway. I left my shoes at the door and walked into my kitchen, still faintly smelling of lavender, sachets tucked into drawers. I sat in my armchair, the one Daniel used to climb into after school, sticky fingers and all, and I waited for the sadness, for the anger, for something. But all I felt was stillness, and then slowly resolve, because if they could erase me from a guest list, they could erase me from anything, and I had not spent my life becoming invisible just to let someone else write me out without a fight. The next morning, I made coffee just the way I liked it. Black with a single cinnamon stick I kept tucked in a jar beside the sugar. The house was still quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press, just lingers. I sat at the small oak table near the window, the one Daniel used to crawl under when he was little and liked to pretend it was his fort. The sun was just starting to stretch across the floor when Gloria knocked. She didn't wait for me to call out. Just let herself in, like she always had, and held up a bakery box as if it were an offering. "Lemon," she said, stepping into the kitchen. "Your favorite." I motioned for her to sit, already setting out 2 saucers and reaching for the kettle. She didn't ask anything at first. Just sat there, hands folded, watching the steam rise while I poured. It was public, wasn't it? Her voice was low, almost careful. I nodded, eyes still on the teacup. She didn't need to say it that loud, but she wanted the others to hear. Gloria shook her head, didn't bother to hide her disapproval. Ashley, that one name carried all the weight it needed. I took a sip and then placed the cup down gently. You know, I was never actually disinvited. I just was never included in the first place. Gloria reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. You raised him better than this. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure that was true anymore. What kind of man watches his mother be turned away at the door and says nothing? I looked out the window, watched the leaves shift on the branches. I thought if I helped enough, if I gave enough, they'd see me for more than just a wallet. Gloria's voice stayed calm but steady. Honey, love that. Depends on your wallet, isn't love. The truth of it settled between us like dust. I nodded slowly, not as an answer, just an acknowledgement. She squeezed my hand gently. Being alone is better than being used. That evening, just as the sky started to dim, my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I stared at it, thumb hovering. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said. His tone was too bright, too casual. How are you?" "I'm well, Daniel. Enjoying the quiet." He chuckled forced. "Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About earlier. Ashley was just stressed, you know. Weddings bring out the worst sometimes." "Of course," I said. "These things happen." Another pause, and then his real reason came out. "Actually, while I have you, I was hoping you could help finalize the last payment for the wedding stuff. Just so we can get everything squared away. You know, tie up loose ends?" I leaned back in my chair, the receiver still to my ear. He didn't know. Ashley didn't know. They assumed the money had already been paid. "Of course, Daniel," I said, my voice soft. "I'll take a look at it tomorrow." He exhaled, relieved. "Great. Ashley's parents are just anxious to get everything settled, you know how it is." "I understand completely. Wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone." When I hung up, I didn't move right away. I looked over at the wedding binder still sitting on the shelf by the desk, pulled it down slowly, flipping through each contract. Every vendor, every deposit, every pending payment. They hadn't read the fine print. They saw the floral arches and the 12-layer cake and assumed it had all been handled. They didn't know I'd only authorized partial deposits. They didn't know everything still sat in limbo waiting on my signature. When Daniel asked me to help with the wedding, I made sure every agreement included one clause, no final payment without my approval. It wasn't meant as a trap. It was just caution. My estate planner, Marissa, had recommended it. That caution had become something else entirely. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop, each row a vendor, each column a date, a balance, a contact person. By the time I was done, it looked less like a wedding plan and more like a chessboard. At 9 p.m., I called Marissa. She sounded tired but alert the way people do when they're used to midnight emergencies. "You want to activate the fraud hold tonight?" she asked. "No, not yet," I said. "Just be ready." She promised a full draft by morning. We hung up. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and listened to the hum of the fridge. The next day I went to the senior luncheon at the community center. Same chipped plates, same tepid coffee. Same small kindnesses passed between people who'd known each other too long to need explanations. I sat at my usual table in the corner. Margaret and Helen joined me, both widowed, both sharp, in their own quiet ways. "You didn't look yourself this morning," Helen said, setting a biscuit on my plate. I offered a small smile. "Family drama." Margaret didn't hesitate. "Does it involve money?" I blinked, surprised. "It usually does," she said gently. "When the children are involved." We talked in low voices while bingo numbers were called in the background, and someone laughed too loudly 2 tables over. "They think I'm weak because I don't argue," I said. Margaret shook her head. "Quiet isn't weak. Quiet means you hold your cards close," Helen added. "You hold everything they think they already have. That's why they keep smiling while they sharpen the knives." I nodded, letting that settle. "I never thought they'd turn my trust into a weapon." Margaret's voice was steady. "They always do if you let them. They count on guilt to keep you compliant." I looked down at my untouched biscuit. "What would you do?" Helen didn't pause. "Protect what's yours, and don't let them see it coming." Later that week, I sat across from Marissa again, this time over video call. My living room was clean and still, everything in its place. She reviewed each document one more time. "Authorization withdrawal phrase is in place," she said. "Any attempt to process the pending balances will trigger a hard hold." I nodded. "Good." She looked up from her screen. "They may try to challenge it. If they do, we're ready." I didn't say much, just watched the cursor blink on my screen. It felt like a lighthouse in the fog. Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Daniel standing there with a bouquet of lilies and hydrangeas, the kind of flowers meant to patch things up without really saying anything. "Mom," he said, smiling too wide. "Surprise visit." I stepped aside and let him in. The apartment still smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. We sat across from each other in the living room. He talked about the honeymoon, the weather, the food. Then his tone shifted. "Mom, I've been thinking. You've got so many accounts and papers to manage. It might be easier if we consolidated things. Ashley and I could help you, keep things organized." I nodded slowly. "That's very thoughtful. But I'm comfortable with my setup." He tried again. "You know you can trust me. We're family." I smiled, soft and even. "Trust, Daniel, isn't inherited. It's earned." He didn't say anything right away, just swallowed and looked like he was trying to remember the next line in a script that wasn't working anymore. And for the first time, he could see it. Whatever game they thought they were playing, I was already 3 moves ahead. By Monday morning, I was back at my desk. The wedding binder sat beside me, a familiar presence now as steady as the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I hadn't slept much the night before, but it didn't show. I made tea, folded the laundry, watered the orchids on the windowsill. Everything I did that morning was deliberate quiet, measured like I was stitching a hem by hand and couldn't afford to slip. My phone stayed silent most of the morning. Around lunchtime, I stepped outside to sweep the front walk. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that never quite commits to rain. I'd barely finished when I heard the chime of a text. It was Daniel. He'd sent a link. How to simplify estate management for aging parents. A few minutes later, another came through. An article about reducing financial stress for seniors. I stood on the porch for a long moment, phone in hand, before I walked inside and set it down on the entry table without responding. Later that afternoon, I replied, "Thank you, Daniel. I'll bring this up with my advisor." Simple, polite, non-committal. That was the rhythm I fell into. He'd send something subtle, another link, a suggestion, a reminder, and I'd respond just warmly enough to keep him guessing. Each message built its own trail. Each reply gave me one more layer of distance. On Wednesday, I met with Diane again. She had already printed and labeled the first full folder of documents. Contracts, emails, text transcripts, all organized in the kind of order attorneys appreciate and families rarely expect. "I'm glad you kept everything," she said, flipping through the packet. "These messages are important. If they ever try to make a claim for conservatorship or suggest you're unfit, this shows the progression clearly. They're building your defense for you." She didn't smile. Neither did I. It wasn't that kind of moment. We sat in that small downtown office under humming fluorescent lights, and we both understood exactly what this had become. By Thursday, Daniel's tone had shifted again. Less concerned, more casual, as if we were simply chatting. "Just thinking long term," he wrote. "Wouldn't it be nice to have everything handled in one place? Less to worry about?" "Interesting idea," I replied. "I'll ask Marissa if that makes sense for me." He didn't respond right away. That night, I walked through the house and dusted the picture frames in the hallway. There was one of Daniel from his high school graduation cap, tilted back, eyes full of relief. I picked it up, gave the glass a slow wipe, and set it back down where it had always been. By the weekend, I'd heard from 2 vendors. Neither had been paid in full. Both wanted to know if I planned to release the funds soon. I gave them the same answer. "Payments are under review. I'll notify you when a decision is made." The florist was the first to sound nervous. Something about import delays, something about holding fees. I listened carefully, thanked her for the update, and made no promises. On Sunday morning, Gloria came by again. She brought pumpkin bread this time, wrapped in parchment and tied with a piece of green twine. She didn't ask how I was doing, just made 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. I told her everything, not in a dramatic way, not all at once, just piece by piece as we passed the sugar bowl back and forth. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, arms folded loosely. "You know," she said after a moment, "when people feel entitled to your kindness, they get angry when you set limits." I didn't answer. She reached over and tore off a corner of the bread, her hands steady. "You've always given them grace. Now you're giving them clarity." Later that day, I sat by the window and watched the wind pull at the trees. I hadn't heard from Daniel again, not since I'd asked him for space. The quiet settled into the house like a guest that wasn't planning to leave. It didn't press on me. It didn't ache. It just stayed. At dinner, I ate alone at the kitchen table. 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 cloth napkin folded neatly beside the glass. There was no sadness in it, no bitterness, just habit. I washed the dishes by hand and let them dry in the rack, wiped down the counter, turned off the lights one by one. In the living room, the candle on the windowsill had burned low. I watched the last of it pool at the bottom of the glass and reached over to blow it out. That night, I wrote down every financial login and verification step in a small notebook and placed it in the safety box in my closet. I double-checked the security holds Marissa had set up, reviewed the backup contacts, made sure everything was in place. Then I sat back in my chair, pulled a blanket over my legs, and closed my eyes. By the time morning came, I was ready. By Monday afternoon, I was sitting on the patio with a glass of water and a notepad in my lap. The wind had picked up, nudging the potted rosemary along the rail. I'd been jotting down small to-do lists, things around the house I'd been putting off, but my mind wasn't on any of it. I kept thinking about the silence that had followed my last reply to Daniel. He hadn't sent a message in 2 days. Not a question, not a link, not a reminder. I looked out toward the street, at the cars moving quietly past the stop sign on the corner. Everything looked normal, but something had changed, and I could feel it. The phone finally rang around 3 years. It was Marissa. "Patricia," she said, voice even. "Just a heads up, the venue reached out. They're trying to confirm final payment authorization. Did they sound concerned? They're escalating. We triggered the hold as planned. It's flagged as a potential discrepancy pending review. I've already logged it. I stood up and stepped inside, closing the sliding door behind me. Okay, let's document every interaction from here on out. I already have. I thanked her and hung up. By the time I reached the living room, the florist had left a voicemail. She didn't sound panicked, not yet, but her tone had shifted. The orchids were at JFK, she said, waiting in customs. Clearance fees were overdue. If they weren't paid soon, the shipment would be destroyed. I called her back and kept my tone neutral. I said I was aware of the situation and that there was a temporary hold on all disbursements. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't offer a timeline. I simply said I'd reach out if anything changed. She was polite, even gracious, but I could hear the tension underneath. These vendors had been promised everything. Now they were watching their timelines fray. The next call came from Daniel. "Mom," he said, not bothering to hide the irritation in his voice. "What's going on?" The florist just called Ashley's dad. "Customs is holding the flowers. No one's answering their emails." I kept my voice calm. "What's going on, Daniel, is that you excluded me from your wedding. Financial decisions included. I didn't make that choice." "That's not fair," he said quickly. Ashley was stressed. "We didn't mean to. You didn't forget to include me. You made a decision, and choices have consequences." He exhaled sharply. "Ashley's parents are furious. This is embarrassing." "No," I said, voice steady. "What's embarrassing is assuming I would quietly fund something after being told I wasn't wanted." "Mom, you're ruining everything." "I'm not ruining anything. I'm stepping back. I'm withdrawing what was never acknowledged." There was a long pause on the other end, then a soft, almost pleading, "Please." I didn't answer. The silence did enough. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help Daniel with his homework. I stared out the window while the tea cooled beside me. I remembered the boy who used to hug me when he was too tired to finish his spelling. The boy who once wrote a birthday card saying I was his best friend. And I saw the man he'd become now, who stood behind his bride while she pushed me out. Ashley hadn't made him do that. She might have made it easy, but she hadn't made it happen. That was Daniel's choice. I said it aloud for the first time. Not loud, just enough to feel it in the room. You don't love me. You love what I can provide. It didn't sting the way I thought it might. It felt like opening a window after holding your breath too long. The next day, I visited Diane's office. The paperwork was ready. The transfer of assets, the trust revisions, the foundation structure. She walked me through each section page by page. The language was clear. The protections were layered. My estate was no longer vulnerable to outside influence, not even from family. Especially not from family. "There's enough documentation now to shut down any challenge before it begins," she said, tapping the final folder. "They can try, but they'll lose." I nodded, flipping through the last few pages. "Let's file it." When I left the building, the sun had already dipped behind the courthouse across the street. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. Just still. At the corner, someone was selling garden mums from the back of a pickup truck. I bought 2. Later that night, I set them on the windowsill and opened the notebook I kept in the drawer beside the armchair. The last page was already filled. Every vendor contact, every contract clause, every pending balance. I reached for a new page. There was still more to do. By Friday morning, the kitchen was already warm from the sun cutting through the window above the sink. I stood there a moment, holding my coffee mug with both hands, listening to the slow hum of the refrigerator. Everything in the house was exactly as I'd left it the night before. Neat, quiet, ready. The laptop sat open on the dining table, the spreadsheet still pulled up from the night before. I reviewed it again, cell by cell. Vendor names, due dates, contact numbers. Next to each one, a column marked freeze code in soft gray. At 10 a.m. sharp, I had Marissa back on a video call. Her hair was pulled into a low twist, and her blazer was the same one she wore whenever she meant business. She scrolled through the legal documents on her end, while I flipped through my printed binder on mine. Any attempt to access the accounts, she confirmed, will trigger immediate fraud alerts and a hard hold. Your authorization card has been officially invalidated. The phrase is on file. Authorization withdrawn. Suspected fraud. I nodded. Good. She looked at me through the screen. If they try to initiate payment directly through the vendors, it'll bounce. We've triple-layered every access point. I want every trail closed before Monday. They're already closed. There was nothing else to say, so we ended the call. That afternoon, I went to the bank in person. I wore my navy cardigan and slacks, nothing fancy, but pressed and neat. The branch manager, Mr. Riley, met me at the glass door and led me to his office. We'd spoken once before years ago when I updated my beneficiary designations after Daniel got married. He offered me water, which I declined, and pulled up my account profiles on his screen. We've added dual verification protocols to your savings, investment, and retirement accounts, he said. Any external request must be authorized by you in writing in person right here. No digital access. No remote approvals. Perfect, I said. He hesitated, then added gently. Family-based financial fraud is up. A lot of clients your age are experiencing similar issues. I looked him in the eye. That's why I'm doing this now, while I still have the choice. After I signed the forms, he walked me to the lobby. I shook his hand and thanked him. Outside, the air had cooled. It was one of those days that started like spring and ended like fall. I walked home. Saturday came quietly. No doorbell, no emails, just a smooth, calm stretch of time where nothing moved faster than the wind over the trees outside my window. I sat in my armchair and reread Diane's cover letter for the trust. I marked a few things I wanted to clarify on Monday. Then, I placed the binder back in the drawer where the old warranty manuals used to sit. By mid-morning, the doorbell did ring. A soft chime once. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there holding a bouquet of lilies and pale hydrangeas. The kind of flowers that looked thoughtful without saying anything too specific. He smiled. Surprise visit, he said. I stepped aside and let him in. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. He glanced around like he hadn't been inside in years, even though it had only been a few months. You look good, he said. Relaxed. I am, I replied, motioning for him to sit. He placed the bouquet on the coffee table, still wrapped in plastic, and settled onto the couch. The cushions gave a soft sigh beneath him. We started with small talk. The honeymoon resort, the weather, his new team at the firm. I let him speak, nodding now and then. I offered him a glass of water, which he declined. Then he shifted. Mom, he said, his tone softening. Ashley and I were talking. We know you've got a lot going on with the accounts and paperwork, and we just thought it might be time to streamline things a bit. You know, consolidate, simplify. I waited. Nothing drastic, he added quickly. Just maybe move some things into joint oversight. Make sure you're not juggling it all alone. I took a slow sip of my tea, then set the cup down gently on its saucer. That's very thoughtful of you, but I'm quite comfortable with how things are set up. His smile faltered slightly, then returned. Of course, of course. We just worry sometimes that you've got too much on your plate. These things get more confusing as people get older. I didn't flinch. Confusion comes from a lack of planning, I said calmly. Fortunately, I've been planning for some time. He blinked once, then adjusted in his seat. You know you can trust me, he said. We're family. I gave him a full smile then. The kind you give when someone finally says the thing you've been waiting for. Trust, Daniel, isn't inherited. It's earned. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the flowers, then back at me. The silence between us was quiet, but thick. Well, he said, finally standing. Just think about it, okay? I will, I said, walking him to the door. Have a safe drive home. When the door clicked shut behind him, I stood in the hallway for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel shaken. I felt certain. Whatever they thought they were planning, whatever move they believed I hadn't seen coming, it was already too late. By Monday morning, the first cracks had begun to show. At 9:14 a.m., Marissa called. Her voice was sharper than usual, not rushed, just clipped at the edges. The florist's third-party logistics team reached out, she said. The orchids are still sitting at JFK. Daily storage fees are climbing. They've sent Ashley 3 voicemails already. I was standing at the window when she told me. The sky outside was pale and flat, one of those mornings where even the birds seemed unsure about starting the day. They're running out of time, Marissa added. And the venue, they just issued breach of contract notices. Copies have gone to Daniel Ashley and Ashley's parents. I turned away from the window. Anyone else? Yes. The notice was forwarded to Daniel's employer, the one Ashley's father helped secure. I walked slowly back to the dining table and sat down. My tea had gone cold. So now it's touching his job. It's no longer just an unpaid invoice, Marissa said. It's a reputational issue. I thanked her, asked her to keep documenting everything, and ended the call. Outside, the neighborhood was still. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then stopped. I sat in the quiet and folded my hands in my lap. Around 2, Marissa forwarded me a copy of the florist's latest email. The subject line read, Urgent Final Clearance Notification. The phrasing had changed. Less polite, more legal. The clock was ticking, and they knew exactly whose name was on the contract. By evening, Daniel called again. I let it ring once before I picked up. Mom, he said, voice tight. Everything's falling apart. I didn't respond. He filled the silence himself. Her father's furious. People at work are hearing about the breach notice. My job offer is under review now. You can still fix this. Please. Fix, I said quietly. Yes. Just release the funds. You don't have to talk to them. Just authorize it. It's a mess. I waited a moment before answering. You want me to fix something I was never allowed to be part of? That wasn't me. That was Ashley. No, Daniel. You stood there. You let it happen. You didn't forget me. You erased me. He went quiet for a beat. Then softly, I didn't think it would spiral like this. But you were willing to risk it. Because you thought I wouldn't say no. His voice dropped again. I just wanted to protect the image. I didn't want things to get messy. I looked at the lamp on the side table, its soft yellow light casting faint circles on the wall. You cared more about how it looked than how it felt. That's why it's messy now. There was nothing left to say, so I let him sit in the silence until he hung up. The next few days passed in slow increments. I kept to my routine, walked to the corner for groceries, took a book out from the library, answered no calls that didn't come from Marissa or Diane. Daniel didn't reach out again until Saturday morning. I was watering the ferns on the balcony when the doorbell rang. This time, I didn't check the peephole. I knew it was him. I didn't rush. I finished, set the watering can down, wiped my hands, and opened the door. He stood there alone. No flowers this time. Just Daniel in a wrinkled jacket, eyes darker than I remembered. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" "We're talking," I replied. "Please, inside. We need privacy. There's nothing private about what you did. This is the path you chose." He looked down, nodded. "I know. We made mistakes." I didn't move. His voice changed, then sharp at the edges. "You've ruined everything. The wedding, my job. Ashley's family pulled out of the new house deal. You didn't have to let it get this far. We're family." I studied him for a long moment. "No, Daniel. You ruined it when you let her humiliate me. When you decided my place in your life was as a bank, not a person." His hands balled into fists. "You could have helped us fix it. I did help you. For years. I gave and gave because I believed you saw me as your mother. But you only saw my money. That's not true. Then why was I standing outside your wedding, Daniel? Why did she feel so sure that she could look me in the eye and turn me away? Who taught her that?" He had no answer, just a long pause. His breathing picked up sharp and uneven. "I trusted you," I said quietly. "And you used that trust to build a life that didn't include me." His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. "We can't afford the lawsuits. Her father's pulled everything. The new firm is out. I lost the offer. I'm losing everything." I stepped forward, but only enough to hold the door steady. "Then maybe," I said softly, "you'll understand what it feels like to give everything and receive nothing." He looked at me stunned. Not angry now, just cornered. "Please, Mom." I shook my head, voice even. "I will always be your mother, Daniel, but I am no longer your victim." He didn't argue. He just turned and walked down the steps, the back of his jacket lifting slightly in the breeze. By the following week, everything had begun to settle, but not in the way they'd hoped. It was the kind of settling that comes after a collapse, when the dust begins to float down, and the cracks in the foundation no longer hide behind decorations and smiles. The first lawsuit came from the venue, then the florist, then the band. All separate entities, all naming Ashley's family and Daniel jointly. Each suit clean backed by contracts that bore my name as the initial client and theirs as the final signatories who failed to fulfill the balance. The orchids had been destroyed days earlier. The daily storage fees at JFK had crossed 5 figures before anyone responded. The photographer withheld the final gallery. The caterer declined to release their licensing documents to the couple until settlement was confirmed. Every detail they had once paraded across social media now became a point of dispute, each invoice a line item in public filings. Marissa forwarded the updates to me without commentary. Just PDFs with subject lines like updated filing. Venue versus Green Hartswell. The quiet was louder than anything they'd said to me directly. I didn't hear from Daniel again. No calls, no messages. I assumed he was still in town, but I never saw his car parked out front again. There was no apology, no offer. Just silence. Ashley's family began retreating from every corner of public life. The foundation gala they'd co-chaired was quietly reassigned. A charity board position Ashley's father held was handed off to someone else, effective immediately. Their names began disappearing from social calendars where they'd once been anchors. I didn't gloat. I didn't watch it unfold with any sense of victory. It felt more like watching fog roll out from a place you once lived, revealing the shape of the land underneath, uneven, cracked, unfamiliar. At the senior center, the murmurs started. Not from me, but from others. A few whispered that Ashley's wedding had fallen into a bit of scandal. One woman, whose daughter had attended the event, said she'd heard the flowers hadn't been paid for. Another had caught wind that the venue had pressed charges. The details weren't all accurate, but the tone was unmistakable. The same tone I'd heard the day I stood outside those marble doors and walked away. Gloria started bringing over baked goods again. Lemon bars, cornbread. One afternoon, a full quiche in a warm dish towel. "You know you've become something of a quiet legend," she said, setting down the pie on the counter. "They say you froze a wedding without lifting a finger." I raised an eyebrow. She smiled, without yelling, without showing up uninvited, without even raising your voice. "I didn't say anything, just started cutting 2 slices. You taught them all something they forgot," she said. "Love without respect is theft." We sat at the table, the window opened slightly behind us, letting in the cool breeze. Across the street, a neighbor was trimming their hedges. The normal rhythms of a quiet life had returned even as the noise from the past still moved just beneath the surface. The foundation we'd built, Marissa and I, held everything. Not just the house and accounts, but the dignity I'd gathered back piece by piece. Every attempt to reach back into that vault now hit a wall of signatures, oversight, and time-stamped documentation. The trust stayed untouched. I hadn't heard a word from Ashley since the wedding day. No calls, no notes, no attempt at reconciliation. I figured whatever affection had once fueled her performance was long gone. Without the financial ties, there wasn't much left to disguise it. A few distant relatives stopped calling too. The kind who'd once sent Christmas cards only after hearing about Daniel's engagement or a gift I'd mailed for a baby shower. I didn't miss them. By the end of the month, I was sitting alone in the living room, sorting old documents to shred. A drawer full of years' school photos, tax returns, insurance paperwork. I paused at one envelope. Inside, an old letter from Daniel. He must have been in his 2nd year of college. The handwriting was neater back then. "Thanks for everything, Mom. I promise I won't ever forget what you've done for me." I folded it carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and slid it into the keep pile. Some memories didn't have to be erased. They just didn't belong on the front shelf anymore. Outside, the afternoon light had gone soft. The sky was starting to shift. I stood at the window and watched the trees stir slightly in the breeze. The damage had been done, not by me, but by the belief that I would never draw a line. That belief no longer stood. A few weeks later, I was folding laundry when the mail arrived, just the usual circulars and an envelope from the foundation's accountant. Inside was a routine quarterly statement, neatly printed and stapled, confirming everything was in place. The house, the accounts, the safeguards. I stood at the kitchen counter and read through it slowly, then filed it in the cabinet next to the trust documents. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to brace for. That afternoon, Gloria stopped by with a small tin of shortbread cookies. We sat on the porch with our cups of tea and watched the wind pick up across the street, tugging at a neighbor's flag that had frayed at the corner. She didn't ask about Daniel. By then, she knew better than anyone what silence meant in a house like mine. We talked about everything else. The new coffee shop opening down on Cedar, her niece's move to Florida, the casserole she was making for Sunday's church supper. Ordinary things. Steady things. Eventually, after she left, I walked back inside and took a few minutes to myself. I stood at the window with the curtains drawn open, watching the last of the light spread across the sidewalk. There had been no apology, no sudden moment of clarity or heartfelt reckoning. Just distance, just quiet. But the house felt peaceful again. Not because everything had gone back to the way it was, it hadn't. And it wouldn't. But because I wasn't standing at the edge anymore, waiting to be invited in. That need had passed. In the evenings, I found myself reading more. I pulled out old books I hadn't opened in years, tucked into corners, with a throw blanket and soft jazz humming from the radio. I started baking again, not for company, just for the way cinnamon fills a room and makes it feel like home. Some nights, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Other nights, I didn't bother. The comfort came from knowing I could choose. Daniel's wedding album never arrived. There were no thank you notes, no updates, just quiet threads of gossip that made their way back to me in bits. Ashley's parents stepping down from a board, Daniel's absence from the firm's quarterly newsletter, a canceled house contract in the suburbs. I didn't keep track. I didn't need to. One morning, while I was weeding the garden bed near the side fence, I found an old plastic toy buried just under the soil, a little yellow truck Daniel must have lost decades ago. I wiped the dirt from it gently and placed it on the windowsill by the sink. It didn't make me sad. It was just a reminder of who he used to be and how far we'd drifted from that. I still love my son. That never changed. But love isn't supposed to cost your dignity. And respect, real, steady, earned respect, is the only ground it can safely grow from. I gave everything I had to help him build a life. What I didn't realize until now was that I deserved to be part of it, not as a silent investor, not as a shadow behind the curtain, but as his mother. And when that was denied to me, I finally learned to stop asking for a seat at the table. I built a new one, quietly, firmly, mine. So, if you've ever felt pushed aside by the people you gave your heart to, if you've ever been told you were no longer needed once the giving stopped, I hope you remember this. Your kindness doesn't owe anyone your silence, and love without respect, that's not family. That's theft. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to breathe, share it with someone who needs it, and be sure to follow for more. You're not alone, not ever.